It began on a peaceful Sunday morning, but within minutes, it would become the day that changed America forever. Across the Hawaiian Islands, December 7th, 1941, started quietly. Sunrise painting the sky in soft gold. Palm trees swaying in the warm breeze, and the deep blue waters of Pearl Harbor glistening like a postcard of tranquility. Sailors lounged on decks, officers enjoyed their morning coffee, and families prepared for another calm weekend on the edge of the Pacific. It was supposed to be just another Sunday, but history had other plans. Welcome to the story of the day the United States was thrust into World War II. A story of shock, resilience, and the moment America rose as a global force. Before the explosions, before the smoke, before the chaos, there was peace. And sometimes, peace makes the storm hit even harder. So settle in as we journey back to the morning that awakened a sleeping giant and reshaped the destiny of a nation. And if you're fascinated by the turning points of American history, make sure you stay with me all the way to the end. The year was 1941. Europe was already burning. Germany had conquered Poland, France, Belgium, Norway, the Netherlands, nation after nation buckling under the relentless force of the Nazi war machine. London had been bombed for months during the Blitz. Hitler marched east toward the Soviet Union. The world was unraveling, one invasion at a time. In Asia, Japan had spent a decade expanding aggressively, first into Manchuria, then deeper into China. The Japanese Empire believed its survival depended on controlling the Pacific. Oil, rubber, steel, everything a modern military needed. But one thing stood in their way: the United States. President Franklin Roosevelt had placed embargoes on Japan, choking off critical fuel supplies. Japan saw this not as economic pressure, but as a threat to its very existence. Tensions rose. Diplomatic negotiations stalled, and behind the scenes, Japanese military leaders began planning something bold, something unthinkable. They believed that if they could strike a devastating surprise blow against America, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one decisive attack, then the United States would lose the will to fight. Japan could seize the Pacific, fortify its empire, and force the U.S. into a negotiation from a position of weakness. That plan became Pearl Harbor. But as December began, the United States had no idea that the blow was coming. In Washington, military intelligence intercepted fragments of Japanese communication, but nothing that clearly warned of an attack on Hawaii. Many believed that if war erupted, the Japanese would strike closer to their territory, maybe the Philippines or Malaysia, not a massive surprise assault 4,000 miles away. Even the commanders in Hawaii, Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short, felt relatively secure. Pearl Harbor was seen as too far, too well defended, too risky for Japan to target. It was a fortress in the middle of the ocean. Or so they thought. On the night of December 6, 1941, while Americans slept across the mainland, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Sori, Hiri, Shokaku, and Zuikaku sailed through the dark waters north of Hawaii. A strike force of more than 350 aircraft prepared for their mission. Pilots studied maps, checked equipment, and wrote farewell letters, believing many of them would not return. Before dawn, the order was given. Tora! Tora! The signal for total surprise achieved. Back in Pearl Harbor, the morning of December 7th felt calm, almost sleepy. The battleships anchored in Battleship Row. The West Virginia, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Nevada, Maryland, California, and the mighty USS Arizona rested peacefully in the harbor. Sailors scrubbed decks. Some slept in late. Others prepared for Sunday church services. On the nearby airfields, Wheeler, Bellows, and Hickam rows of American aircraft sat wingtip to wingtip, parked closely together due to fears of sabotage. No one imagined a full-scale aerial assault. At 7:02 a.m., 2 American radar operators in Opana Point detected a massive formation of aircraft heading toward Oahu. They called in the sighting, but the report was dismissed as a group of incoming American B-17 bombers expected from the mainland. The warning never reached the commanders who needed it most. At 7:48 a.m., just minutes before the attack, sailors aboard battleships noticed aircraft in the distance. Some thought it was a drill. Others thought nothing of it at all. A few seconds later, the rising sun glinted off the wings of the incoming planes, and the red meatball insignia of the Japanese Empire became unmistakable. The first wave of the attack crashed into Pearl Harbor like a thunderstorm of steel and fire. Dive bombers screamed downward, torpedo planes skimmed low over the water, and fighters strafed anything that moved. The sound was deafening explosions, machine gun fire, shouts of confusion and panic mixing into a terrifying chaos. The USS Arizona was hit almost immediately. A Japanese armor-piercing bomb plunged through its forward deck and ignited the ship's ammunition magazine. What happened next was a blast so powerful it ripped the battleship apart, sending a fireball hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion shook the harbor like an earthquake, and within seconds, the Arizona began sinking. Over 1,100 men died in an instant, one of the single deadliest moments in U.S. military history. On the USS Oklahoma, sailors barely had time to react before torpedoes slammed into the hull. The ship rolled over, trapping hundreds of men inside. Some were rescued later by crews cutting through the metal with torches. Many never made it out. At Hickam Airfield and Wheeler Field, rows of American planes exploded under relentless machine gun fire and bombs. Pilots sprinted across tarmacs, trying desperately to reach their aircraft, but most never got airborne. The attack had been designed to eliminate U.S. air power before it could respond, and it worked. America was caught in a nightmare unfolding in broad daylight. Across the harbor, men acted with impossible courage under fire. Some fought with whatever weapons they could grab. Others rushed to save their shipmates from burning compartments. Medics treated the wounded, even as explosions shook the ground beneath them. Young sailors, some barely out of high school, rose to the moment with bravery that would be remembered for generations. The battleship USS Nevada managed to get moving, attempting to escape the harbor despite heavy damage. But as Japanese pilots realized the Nevada might block the entire channel if it sank there, they launched a furious assault. Bombs and torpedoes tore into its hull until the captain ordered the ship to be beached to prevent the harbor from being sealed off. The Nevada survived, but barely. In the midst of chaos, countless Americans became heroes. Mess hall cooks fired anti-aircraft guns. Nurses treated wounded soldiers as bullets ripped through windows. Sailors swam through burning oil to pull others to safety. The attack revealed the best of the human spirit in the worst of moments. But the assault wasn't over. At 8:50 a.m., the second wave of Japanese aircraft arrived, targeting shipyards, airfields, and docked vessels. More explosions thundered across Pearl Harbor. The USS Shaw erupted in a massive blast when its forward magazine detonated. The destroyer USS Cassin and USS Downs were wrecked in dry dock. Buildings collapsed. Fires consumed everything they touched. By the time the final Japanese planes turned back toward their carriers shortly after 10 a.m., the devastation was overwhelming. The costs were staggering. More than 2,400 Americans killed, over 1,100 wounded, nearly 20 ships damaged or sunk, over 180 aircraft destroyed, a Pacific fleet crippled, at least on the surface. But the Japanese had made one critical mistake: the U.S. aircraft carriers Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga were not in port. They had missed their true strategic targets. Still, America was stunned. Across the mainland, families gathered around radios as urgent bulletins interrupted Sunday programs. Shock turned to grief. Grief turned to anger. And anger transformed into resolve. That afternoon, President Roosevelt prepared an address that would be heard around the world. His voice, steady and unshakable, would define the moment that changed America's destiny. Roosevelt understood the weight of the moment. He knew that America was standing at a crossroads, from isolation to full-scale global war. On the morning of December 8, 1941, millions of Americans tuned in as he stepped before Congress. His voice was calm, steady, and powerful. And with just a few words, he captured both the horror of the attack and the unity of a nation rising to meet its destiny. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The chamber fell silent. The country listened. And as he recounted the treachery of the attack, the shock, the casualties, and the devastation, a profound sense of purpose swept across the American people. When Roosevelt finished, Congress erupted in applause. A vote to declare war on Japan passed almost unanimously, every vote but one. The United States of America had officially entered World War II, but awakening the American giant did not just mean mobilizing military forces. It meant lighting a fire in the hearts of million soldiers, sailors, factory workers, mothers, fathers, and children who would all play a part in the struggle ahead. The attack on Pearl Harbor unified the country in a way no one could have predicted just days earlier. Young men lined up outside recruitment offices, some still in high school, eager to enlist. Factories switched overnight from consumer goods to weapons, planes, and tanks. Women stepped into roles traditionally denied to them: Rosie the Riveter, the women Air Force service pilots, the nurses who would save untold lives. America did not retreat. America did not negotiate. America rose. But the road to Pearl Harbor had been long and complicated. To understand why the attack happened and why it was destined to change the world, it's important to rewind the story slightly. Japan's expansion across East Asia had been fueled by an ideology that viewed war not as a last resort, but as a necessity. The military leadership believed Japan was destined to rule Asia and the Pacific. They saw Western influence, especially American influence, as an obstacle to their imperial ambitions. Japan's invasion of China in the 1930s had shocked the world, with atrocities like the rape of Nanking revealing the brutality of their campaign. As Japan pushed deeper into China, the United States imposed economic restrictions, hoping to slow their aggression. In 1940, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, aligning itself with Germany and Italy. The world was dividing into two camps, Allied and Axis, and conflict was becoming unavoidable. By mid-1941, Japan depended on American oil for nearly 80% of its supply. Without fuel, its navy, the backbone of its empire, would be paralyzed. So when Roosevelt froze Japanese assets and cut off oil exports, Japanese leaders reached a grim conclusion. They must strike before they ran out of resources, or their empire would die. Their solution was Pearl Harbor, a preemptive blow meant to knock the United States out of the Pacific, or at least delay America long enough for Japan to seize everything it needed: the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Indonesia, and the vast resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia. It was a gamble unlike any in Japan's history, and it would ultimately be catastrophic. But on the morning of December 7th, as bombs fell and smoke filled the sky, America wasn't thinking about geopolitics. They were thinking about survival. The attack had taken lives in every way imaginable. Sailors trapped underwater, pounding on hulls as rescue teams raced to reach them. Men scorched by burning oil that covered the surface of the harbor. Airmen killed before they could even strap into their cockpits. Nurses racing between wounded bodies, ignoring the danger around them. Civilians hit by stray bullets and shrapnel. The human cost was staggering, and the emotional scars would last for generations. One of the most haunting stories was that of the USS Arizona. When the ship exploded, a wall of flame and debris engulfed the deck, and the ship sank within minutes. Only a few hundred of the Arizona's crew survived. Many who escaped would carry survivors' guilt for the rest of their lives, haunted by the memory of friends they could not save. Yet, even in tragedy, stories of incredible heroism emerged. Chief Petty Officer John Finn rushed into the open, mounted a machine gun on an exposed platform, and fired at Japanese aircraft for more than 2 hours, even after being hit more than 20 times. He became one of the first Medal of Honor recipients of the war. At Hickam Field, Lieutenant Colonel William Farthing rallied his men under relentless bombardment, directing defenses despite explosions tearing through the airfield. Civilian firefighters sped toward the naval base to help combat the inferno, knowing full well they were entering a war zone. Acts of bravery shown everywhere, some recorded in history, others known only to those who lived through the chaos. While Pearl Harbor burned, Japanese leaders believed they had struck a decisive blow. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack, had doubts even in victory. Privately, he feared what Japan had awakened. He's famously believed to have said that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. Whether he said those exact words or not, they captured the truth. Japan had gambled everything on one desperate strike, and now they would face the industrial and military might of the United States. In the days following the attack, America transformed at lightning speed. The government and military scrambled to assess the damage and plan the next move. The Pacific Fleet's battleships had been decimated, but not all was lost. Many ships were damaged but repairable. Dry docks were intact. Most importantly, the U.S. aircraft carriers, arguably the most crucial naval assets of the new era, were still alive. Carrier warfare would soon dominate the Pacific, and America had just been given an unexpected gift. Its carriers had been spared. Still, the shock waves of Pearl Harbor rippled far beyond Hawaii. Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, drawing America fully into the global conflict. Suddenly, the war was everywhere from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from North Africa to the jungles of the Philippines. Americans braced for more attacks. West Coast cities dimmed their lights at night. Submarines lurked offshore. Air raid drills became routine. The nation felt vulnerable for the first time in generations. But vulnerability turned into determination. Factories roared to life. The Detroit auto industry stopped making cars and started making tanks, planes, and engines. Women filled assembly lines. Children collected scrap metal. Communities bought war bonds. Hollywood produced films to inspire patriotism. Scientists accelerated technologies that would change the world. Entire cities shifted to wartime production around the clock. America was no longer a bystander. It was a powerhouse gearing up for the fight of the century. In the Pacific, Japanese forces wasted no time. While Pearl Harbor smoldered, Japan struck Hong Kong, the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, Malaya, and Singapore. The Japanese Empire expanded rapidly, their forces seemingly unstoppable. American troops in the Philippines, led by General Douglas MacArthur, were outnumbered, undersupplied, and isolated. Despite fierce resistance, they were eventually forced to retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. What came next, the Bataan Death March, became one of the most brutal atrocities of the war. Pearl Harbor had been just the beginning. Yet even as Japan surged forward, seeds of their defeat had already been planted. The attack had united America, but it had also failed to destroy vital U.S. resources. Oil depots, repair facilities, and submarines remained intact. And the decision not to launch a third wave aimed at America's infrastructure would prove disastrous for Japan. The coming months would test America's resolve in ways few could imagine. But the spirit forged on December 7th, through fire, loss, courage, and unity, would carry the nation forward. From the Coral Sea to Midway, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, from the home front factories to the front lines of Europe, the road ahead would be long and bloody. But Pearl Harbor had changed the United States forever. It had turned a reluctant nation into a determined one. And now, the world would soon see the full power of an America fighting not just for victory, but for justice, honor, and a future free from tyranny. As the smoke cleared from Pearl Harbor, and survivors searched for their friends among twisted metal and burning ships, one truth echoed across the nation. America would not forget. America would not surrender. America would fight back. In the next chapter of this story, the tide of war begins to shift. From intelligence breakthroughs to bold naval strategies, from the courage of Marines in the Pacific jungles to the decisive battles that changed the world, the legacy of Pearl Harbor would echo through every American action that followed. The legacy of Pearl Harbor did not end with smoke rising over Battleship Row. It continued in every battle, every innovation, every act of courage that followed. As America entered the war, the painful lessons of that December morning sparked a transformation unlike anything the country had ever experienced. The United States was no longer a nation divided by debates over isolationism. It was united, its purpose sharpened by tragedy, its resolve strengthened by the memory of those lost. In the months after the attack, U.S. intelligence, military strategy, and production underwent sweeping reforms. The shock of Pearl Harbor exposed failures in communication, readiness, and coordination. Rather than deny them, American leaders confronted them head-on, determined to ensure such a surprise would never happen again. Radar systems were expanded and improved. Intelligence agencies grew more sophisticated. Military branches that once competed for influence began cooperating more closely. The nation shifted from complacency to vigilance. And nowhere was that transformation more important than in the Pacific. While Japan continued its rapid expansion, the United States began preparing for a counterstrike. The first major turning point came early in 1942. It was bold. It was risky. And it came from an unexpected direction. Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle led a daring raid that shocked Japan. 16 American B-25 bombers, launched from an aircraft carrier, a feat considered impossible at the time, and bombed Tokyo. The damage was limited, but the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in centuries, the Japanese homeland had been attacked. The raid signaled to Japan that the United States was coming. It also forced Japanese leadership into making a catastrophic mistake, one that traced its origins back to Pearl Harbor. Believing they could force the U.S. Navy into another decisive blow, Japanese Admiral Yamamoto planned an operation to lure America's aircraft carriers into a trap. The target, a tiny, obscure island in the Pacific known as Midway. What Japan didn't know was that American codebreakers had cracked crucial parts of their naval communication systems. The U's knew the time, the place, and the nature of Japan's attack, turning what could have been another Pearl Harbor into one of the greatest ambushes in military history. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, became the true turning point of the Pacific War. American pilots sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the same type of carriers that launched the Pearl Harbor attack. Scores of Japan's most experienced pilots were lost forever. In just a few hours, Japan's naval aviation would be crippled beyond repair. The balance of power in the Pacific shifted permanently. Midway was more than a battle. It was Pearl Harbor's answer. But victory wouldn't come quickly. The Pacific theater was vast and unforgiving. Jungle warfare, relentless heat, disease, and brutal combat defined the next years. From Guadalcanal to Tarawa, from the Philippines to Okinawa, American forces fought island by island, mile by mile, to push Japan back. Every soldier carried the memory of Pearl Harbor with them. Every battlefield, every sacrifice, every breakthrough was driven by the determination to ensure that December 7th would be answered with triumph. On the home front, that same determination reshaped American society. Millions of citizens rationed food, gasoline, rubber, and metal. War bonds sold at record pace. Women joined the workforce in unprecedented numbers, becoming welders, pilots, engineers, and leaders. Black Americans joined the fight despite segregation, forming units like the Tuskegee Airmen and demanding civil rights with renewed urgency. The war accelerated social change even as it exposed deep inequalities. Across the country, families hung flags in their windows with stars representing loved ones serving overseas. Some stars turned gold. Sacrifice became a shared national experience. The U.S. Navy, rebuilt from the ashes of Pearl Harbor, expanded rapidly. New aircraft carriers emerged from shipyards faster than Japan could produce them. American industry became the arsenal of democracy, sending supplies to both the Pacific and European fronts. While soldiers fought, workers on assembly lines fought with equal intensity, powering the war effort with unmatched productivity. Each victory brought the United States closer to Japan's doorstep. But as the Allies approached the Japanese mainland, the enemy's resistance grew fiercer. Kamikaze attacks, suicide missions by Japanese pilots, became common. Entire units fought to the death rather than surrender. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa revealed the scale of the struggle yet to come. American leaders feared that an invasion of Japan itself might cost millions of lives. The war that began with Pearl Harbor was about to reach its devastating climax. In August 1945, after years of bloodshed, the United States made the fateful decision to use a new, unimaginable weapon, the atomic bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed in 2 flashes of fire and shockwave. Japan, devastated and exhausted, announced its surrender. The war was over. For Americans, victory was triumphant but bittersweet. The cost had been enormous. Thousands lost at Pearl Harbor, hundreds of thousands more in the Pacific and Europe. Yet from the pain of December 7th emerged a nation stronger, more united, and more influential on the world stage than ever before. Pearl Harbor reshaped global politics. It marked the end of American isolationism and the beginning of America's role as a superpower. It led to alliances that endure to this day, to new military doctrines, and to a recognition that the world was now interconnected in ways that demanded cooperation. It also left behind stories, personal, intimate stories, of those who lived and those who died on that fateful morning. Every year, survivors and families gather at the USS Arizona Memorial, where the sunken battleship still rests beneath the waves. Oil known as the Black Tears continues to seep from the hull, drop by drop, a reminder of the men who remain entombed within. Visitors from across the world stand in silence as they look down into the water. They see the outline of the ship. They read the names on the wall. They reflect on the fragility of peace, the cost of war, and the enduring strength of the American spirit. For the United States, Pearl Harbor is more than history. It is a lesson, a warning, and a promise. A reminder that vigilance is necessary, that freedom comes with sacrifice, and that unity in the face of tragedy can transform a nation. As we look back on the morning of December 7th, we remember not only the devastation, but the courage. Not only the loss, but the resilience. Not only the attack, but the response that followed, one that would shape the world for generations. America entered World War II because it had no choice. But it emerged from it because of its people, their determination, their bravery, and their unbreakable resolve. This is the legacy of Pearl Harbor. A legacy carried forward by every American who stands against tyranny and fights for a better world. So as we close this chapter of history, remember the voices of those who were there. The sailors who dove into burning oil to save their friends. The nurses who worked through explosions to treat the wounded, the families who waited for news that sometimes never came. Their stories echo through time. Their sacrifice shaped the nation we know today, and their courage continues to inspire us. Thank you for watching this full documentary journey into one of America's most defining moments. If you want more powerful, emotional, and cinematic explorations of history, make sure to hit like, drop a comment on what moment you want covered next, and subscribe for more incredible stories from the past brought to life. Your support helps keep history alive, and together, we honor the heroes who shaped our world. Until next time, remember, history isn't just something we study. It's something we carry with us.